Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
Good morning and welcome to Money Sense. I'm your host, Amy Hubble, and I'm joined in studio today by my co-host, Simon Kadri.
Good morning.
I feel like you're usually the host, but you're letting me drive, like Dad's letting me drive today. It's exciting.
Letting an American drive a car, golly.
Yeah, exactly, on the right side of the road. But today, our main goal is to shamelessly promote the 7th Annual Cayman Investment Forum, presented by CFA Society Cayman Islands, the same squirrely outfit that brings you Money Sense. So the theme for this forum is the future of human decision-making, and will feature prominent international experts speaking on what role in today's data-driven world the human brain might still have in financial decision-making. You can learn more and register at www.caymaninvestmentforum.com, and listeners of Money Sense can get a 10% discount by using the discount code MONEYSENSE, all caps, one word. Okay, and to get everybody jazzed about the forum, we've got on the line today one of the speakers, which I am most looking forward to hearing, Dr. Daniel Crosby. Officially, Dr. Crosby is a psychologist and behavioral finance expert who helps organizations understand the intersection of the mind and markets. Dr. Crosby's first book, Personal Benchmark, Integrating Behavioral Finance and the Investment Management, was a New York Times bestseller. His second book, The Laws of Wealth, was named one of the best investment books of 2017 by the Axiom Book Review Awards and has been translated into 5 languages. His latest work, The Behavioral Investor, is a comprehensive look at the neurology, physiology, and psychology of sound financial decision-making. Welcome, Daniel. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for getting through my bio. That's brutal. I got to change that right now.
I know. I was trying to guess which 5 languages it was, and I could see Simon across the table kind of wondering which American dialect he was expecting that to be translated into.
Southernese was the first translation.
Is Canadian a language for you guys?
I don't even know.
Having lived in Western Canada, I can tell you that it is a distinct language.
Our producer is Canadian and she's losing her mind back there. Just kidding, Kathy. Okay, so Daniel and I, we've actually been friends for several years. I first met him, in 2015. I was teaching this class 3 times a week at the University of Georgia and was basically desperate for anyone to come teach it for me. You remember that? And I just called him out of the blue and begged him to drive 3 hours round trip and come up there and teach that class for me, and he did it for free, you remember?
How could I forget the lost eyes of the class as they laid their heads on the desk and ignored my lecture.
Yeah,
I could
exactly.
never forget
so
that.
You could know why I was so desperate for somebody else to stand in front of them. I'm really excited for you to now. I'll be able to pay you back by bringing you to, I think, somewhere a little bit prettier. At least you'll be able to see the ocean from that standpoint. But Daniel, the book, The Behavioral Investor, I see it everywhere, and it's on these lists, like right next to Ben Graham and Burton Malkiel and Richard Thaler. Like, how insane is that? And what made you want to write this book specifically?
So it is totally insane. It just got named to a really nice list last week with some heavy hitters, and it's so flattering and it's so exciting. But what made me want to write the book was just a real commitment to doing things that are really difficult that pay very poorly. So this is just, I think, a real value of mine is to try and do hard things that make you no money. No, the reason I wanted to do it was I actually write books for a totally selfish purpose, which is just to understand my craft better and to answer questions that are curious to me. And I find that for my own selfish reasons, I do a deeper dive and I get more thorough answers when I require myself to write it down. And so it's sort of like the old Richard Feynman technique of, identify a hole in your understanding by trying to teach it to someone else. I know until I can write a book about it, I don't understand it as deeply as I should. So I really wrote it for myself, and the fact that other people are reading it is sort of a happy accident.
Yeah, well, that's one way to write a book. And your background is psychology, right? That's where your PhD is in. That's where your academic background is from. Did you know about behavioral finance through that program, or did you kind of fall into it by accident?
No, I definitely did not. So as you correctly stated, that I'm a clinician by education. So my PhD is in clinical psychology, and I went to school to be a shrink, really. And so, about the third year of my doctoral program, I was thoroughly burned out. Like, I was stressed out. I was tired of talking to sad people.
It took you to the third year?
That's right. 40 hours a week of just talking to people who are experiencing mental distress. Like, it's very important work. I'm glad people do it, but I was not personally up to it. And so I loved thinking about the reasons why people did the things they did, but wasn't really well equipped to be a clinician. And so I looked for non-medical applications of psychology. And the first job I got out of grad school was actually vetting bankers pre-hire. So before SunTrust in Atlanta would hire a banker, they would bring me in to do, an IQ test, a personality test, like a half-day assessment of this person to see if they had the smarts and the personality and were able to get along with the team and perform this task. So, long story short, in the bank, I discovered behavioral economics, which I had learned nothing about in my doctoral program, and really just fell in love.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think a lot of kind of obviously the heroes of behavioral finance come from that psychology background. And I think we as the more quant side are just now kind of starting to realize and embrace that softer side of, hey, we do actually need to understand people's personalities and their motivations to actually spur success in investing.
Well, it's fascinating. It's such a mutt of a discipline. Until very recently, you really couldn't go to school for it, as a standalone course of study. So you either became an economist who then, figured out the psychology side, or you were a psychologist who figured out the finance side. Now there are some courses. I think Western Europe. I shouldn't tell Simon this; he'll gloat. But I think Western Europe leads the U.S. with respect to sort of the availability of programs. But sure enough, we're seeing it throughout Europe and Australia and parts of the U.S. now that this is its own course of study.
We should probably try and jump in and try and explain in basic terms what we mean when we've used the phrase a few times, behavioral economics. What do we really mean by that? Because there could be a lot of people listening to this who are liking what we're talking about, but missing the key pointers to the subject matter.
Yeah, so the way that I think about it is economics and finance, they of course have to operationalize things like, utility or happiness or well-being. And so the way that they do this is the way that all scientists do this, is they come up with a shorthand representation of these concepts that can be hard to get your arms around. So historically, classical economics and classical finance has made some assumptions that have sort of cut the human being out of it. And these simplifying assumptions have relied on models of human rationality, human utility maximization, people acting in predictably positive, pro-social ways. And anyone that's ever, ridden on an airplane or gone to the DMV can tell you that that's not always the way that people behave. And so behavioral economics or behavioral finance, which is a subset of the broader field of behavioral economics, these are fields that study human behavior as part of an economic system, or the way that people actually make decisions about their money in every day. That accounts for the messiness and the irrationality and the silliness of humankind.
Well, the silliness this is a subject which is incredibly popular in many fields. In terms of economics, it's become popular. It's become popular in political science as well, hasn't it? The importance of trying to understand human beings and why they behave in a certain way. What's changed that has made this so much more important today than it perhaps was 15 or 20 years ago, or even longer?
Well, it's interesting. You have actually seen a huge uptake in the political sphere. The Obama administration hired some of the brightest lights in behavioral economics. Obama himself was, of course, based in Chicago. many of the brightest lights in behavioral economics work out of the University of Chicago. And so Obama had access to some of the greatest minds in behavioral economics, and they were central to his rise from sort of this unknown senator to the two-term president that he eventually became. In terms of the why now, I think that a number of disciplines tend to overcorrect. The pendulum swings too far. So for many, many years, we were totally undisciplined in the way that we studied, things like finance and economics. And then we have physics envy. We want it to be rigorous. We want it to be scientific. So we swing perhaps to an opposite extreme of saying, anything can be modeled, and anything can be modeled perfectly and simply and reliably. I think, as is so often the case, the truth is somewhere sort of in the moderate middle. And so I think that behavioral economics represents a sort of middle path between, lack of rigor or lack of discipline and an excessive physics envy or an excessive reliance on precision that says that, yes, we can use math, we can use science to try and model how people behave, but no model that includes humans is ever perfect until it includes some of the messiness of human behavior. That's always necessarily going to be a little hard to get perfect.
I can tell Simon's squirming in his chair on this messiness over physics. I know he's been studying physics and trying to work that out, and it is very clean. It works very well. It works in perfect spirals. It works in perfect boxes, and people don't work in perfect boxes.
People are a nuisance, aren't they? That must be said. The world would be so much easier without humans.
Yeah, so would our job would be so much easier without humans. Can you imagine being able to just do our job without those humans interfering with it? Our producer is absolutely shaking her head at us. Just how silly we are.
There's a great Sir Isaac Newton quote about this. Sir Isaac Newton lost his fortune in one of the first speculative bubbles on record. And he said, after losing all this money in this speculative bubble, he said, I can calculate the movement of the stars, but not the madness of men. And, behavioral economics and behavioral finance are about, studying the madness of men and incorporating that into how we run the rest of our calculations.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, we are coming up on time already, so we're going to take a short break, but stay with us. In 30 seconds, we will continue our conversation on behavioral investing with Dr. Daniel Crosby.
Always ensure that food preparation utensils are washed with a strong detergent and rinsed in hot water in the event that they have made contact with flood water. Boil silverware for 10 minutes and immerse glass, porcelain, china, and plastic items in a solution of hot water and 10% chlorine bleach before use. For more post-hurricane food safety tips, visit DEH website at deh.gov.ky.
Dress up or dress down in pink for the Lions Club of Tropical Gardens Breast Cancer Awareness Month Dress Pink Day on October 25th. Get your pink items at the Lions Club of Tropical Gardens Pink Shop in Elizabethan Square, which will be open daily from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pink items include t-shirts, polo shirts, hair accessories, caps, and lapel pins. Funds raised from the sale of the pink items go towards paying for mammogram screenings. The Pink Shop is located in the front of Elizabethan Square, facing Shedden Road. Dress pink with the Lions Club of Tropical Gardens on Friday, October 25th.
This is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands.
And now, more Money Sense.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about behavioral finance and why sometimes investors, because we're human, do not always act rationally as they should.
Right, and I'm going to kick this off, I think, aren't I, by admitting to the fact that I am, by training, an economist, and I do not disagree as two negatives. I agree with what Daniel is saying about the fact that humans behave in a psychological way. They don't always behave rationally. But what's perplexing to me is why that is the case. It's not that, and this is the crux of the question for you, Daniel, is the models that were created by economists are rational, they are logical, and they make intuitive sense. and they were developed by humans who are, although economists, they are rational human beings. And so what's frustrating is, why is it that humans behave differently to how they are predicted to behave if they were predicted to behave rationally?
So this is a fantastic question. It's got a multi-layered answer, so I'll do my best. So one thing that I'll say as a general point is that as a clinician, back when I was still a shrink, one of the things that I would find is that people would present to my office, they would tell me their stories, and many, many times I would scratch my head at their presenting behavior. You know, how in the world is it that this person is doing this or that other thing that seems so irrational, that seems so self-destructive? But without exception, when I sat with them long enough, when I listened to their stories long enough, the behavior always made sense. Now, it wasn't always adaptive, right? It wasn't always a good choice, but it always made sense. And so when we look at this and we try and bring it to the world of economics, you see things like, economists would predict that people would save as much as they needed to save to have a happy retirement, that they would just save the number that they needed to arrive at a good retirement. Well, in behavioral economics, we find strange things that are irrational, like people who look at a picture of their children before making a savings decision save 2.5 times more as people who are not primed with a picture of their children, right? So that is not in the strictest terms rational, but if we learn these things about humankind, we can take advantage of these irrationalities. You know, we assume that irrationality is always bad, but we find that something like goals-based investing or tying back investment decisions to things that are personally meaningful can bring about really good behaviors. And, Thaler and others have actually found ways to take elements of human irrationality, things like being conservative, lazy, prone to the status quo, and they found a way to sort of lock this in via their Save More Tomorrow program, which automated the process of taking out money, of withdrawing money, investing it, and escalating that over time as someone got raises and had greater and greater income. So yes, is it irrational in the strictest sense that people are lazy and status quo prone? Yes, it's irrational in the strictest sense. But just because something's irrational doesn't mean we can't sort of flip it on its head and make it work for our own devices. So to sort of begin to answer the broader question, I would say that human behavior always makes sense with enough context, which is different than saying that it's always, self-fulfilling or adaptive. But as we understand these behaviors, we're able to make them work for us, whether they're rational or irrational in the strictest economic sense of the word.
And something you said there, you talked about Thaler and how he put together arguments to make people improve their saving position. I guess the same argument in everyday parlance people would see in our community would be pensions, how you nudge people to save by deducting money at source as opposed to them making on the face of it, purely rational decision to save for 30 years' time. So it's those sorts of things that have, in essence, developed out of the behavioral science area. Is that approximately true?
No, that's absolutely right. And when I dug into the research for the book too, you also find evolutionary reasons why we act in some of the ways that we do that are so irrational. For instance, bad news is far stickier than good news is. There's an interesting study where a scientist at Ohio State showed pictures to people. The Ohio State University showed
so good
people,
they only have one of them.
showed people pictures of positive, negative, and neutral things. So positive would be like a sports car, negative would be a dead bird, and the neutral would be like a hairbrush or something like this. And what they found is that the more negative the stimulus was, the more over time the brain worked to hold on to that information. So if you think about the way that humankind evolved, not learning from a mistake or not learning to ward off danger could be lethal, right? You don't get to live on to reproduce and pass on those genes. Whereas, good news is you can kind of let it roll off your back because it's not evolutionarily, there's no evolutionary imperative the way there is around avoiding bad news. Well, take that into our modern milieu, and what do you find? You find that investors are, again, 2.5 times as upset about a loss as they are happy about a gain. And when you look at, markets that are up about 60% of the time and down about 40% of the time, the 40% of the time that they're down feels like, much bigger than that to the average investor. So this isn't strictly rational, but in the evolutionary sense, it is. It was rational for us to evolve in this way, to live on in the plains of Africa. But it's trying to apply what was rational thousands of years ago to our modern, our modern investing ecosystem that makes it such a poor fit. So there were, many, many examples of this. Things that have historically served humankind well are ill-suited to our modern day environment.
Well, let me delve a little deeper on that particular subject, because it's a fascinating concept that you've alluded to there. You've brought in an element of human evolution to explain current processes as to how we behave, and it makes very good sense. But the question I have for you is, do you think humans will evolve in a sense to become more or less rational? Then will we as we evolve as humans and we become further and further away from those fear-based decisions, do you think there could be a time that we would actually take decisions which are more rational? And is there any evidence of that on a time series basis?
I think that there is, one of the, I don't want to call it a problem because it's humane, but one of the things that's true of our society that wasn't true of, societies thousands of years ago is that, nature is, of course, red of tooth and claw. And so people who made poor decisions, thousands of years ago just died. Where, people who make poor decisions these days have a variety of social safety nets and other things that will keep them around and keep them having children who will grow up to make, potentially poor decisions too. So we don't have quite the same, we're not quite as vicious in that respect. And so I think that some of the evolutionary imperatives get curbed that way. But I think there's every reason to think that we are and will continue to evolve. The question is, will we evolve quickly enough? Because it's just to get a little doomsday here. That some of our human irrationalities, when they get played out on the national and international stage, can be very damaging. When things like when you pair things like ego and overconfidence and short-sightedness, which are all endemic to the human family, with things like weapons of mass destruction, you could forecast some pretty scary things. That's probably a tangent to what we're talking about here. So yes, I have every reason to believe that we continue to evolve and will continue to evolve, with the caveat that nature's not quite as brutal as it once was, and we have the stakes are higher now. And I hope we are around as a species long enough to evolve to a much higher plane.
Yeah, I do think the stakes are higher, but I kind of agree from some level that it's easier to make these mistakes now, just because it's easier to make a trade. It's easier to log in and do it yourself. You no longer have to, in many cases for my clients, I consider myself like a fence that you have to jump over. Like if you want to do the wrong thing, you do at least have to send me an email, you have to call me on the phone, and there is some kind of cognitive justification that you have to make the case to me on why you're going to make this decision, and then I get the opportunity to make the choice back to you. But in this new world where people can kind of go directly to the market, people can trade almost for free in many cases, do you think behavior will get better, or do you think behavior will get worse?
So there's every reason to suggest that some of the modern technological improvements we have, that the ease of trading, the ubiquity of news, all of this works as a disservice to the average investor. So Meyer Statman studied trading activity in 19 different countries and found that in every case, there was a stepwise relationship between trading and performance, like a negative stepwise relationship, a monotonic relationship for Dr. Hubble, right? So the more you traded, the worse you did in every single country that we've ever studied. And we also know that there's an inverse relationship between the amount of financial news consumed and financial performance. And so it's a very weird thing. Like, everyone wants ease of use, everyone wants transparency and visibility and liquidity, and every one of the things that I just mentioned that are ostensibly good for investors have been shown to be bad for investors. And so I think that there's a real problem here in that, the technology that is ostensibly there to make us feel safe and secure and keep our money safe has the potential to harm us. And it's interesting. I keep my money with a financial advisor who, no disrespect to him, I promise you I know more about financial markets than he does. It's just, it's not that I couldn't trade my money myself. It's just that his job is to keep me from being my own worst enemy. I keep my money there so I can't mess with it, because I know that there will be a shame factor if I call him and want to do something foolish with it. That's exactly how I use my financial advisor.
Right, exactly. That's how I view a lot of my role is, 80% psychologist, 20% portfolio manager. Sure. Okay, we are running a little bit short on time, but if you could, in a pretty brief way, kind of, and I know that you'll have more opportunities to talk to us and give us all of the ways that we can avoid making bad decisions, but what do you think is the biggest thing that any one just normal person walking down the street can do to help themselves make better financial decisions?
So the first thing we have to do is realize that we are susceptible to all of the same mistakes as the next person, right? So a lot of people, overconfidence is the bias that sort of feeds all of the other biases. So it's only once we realize that we're no better than the next person that we really can do what we ought to do. And as a corollary to that, I think the biggest thing that you can do is to automate your investment process. So there's a million different ways that you can invest and trade and be successful. But what I think they all have in common is that they're systematized and that they're rules-based. So I've been a big advocate of making everything automated, everything rules-based, from the way that you save money to the way that you invest money to the way that you withdraw money. Willpower is weak, discretion is limited, and there's basically nothing to suggest that sort of just-in-time discretionary decision-making just about ever beats simple rules. And so, learn the rules and follow them, I think, is the best advice for the average investor. All
right, automate it and stop fiddling with things is, I think, the takeaway there. Well, Sadly, we are out of time. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us on Money Sense. We are really looking forward to hosting you down here in Cayman for the 7th Annual Cayman Investment Forum, which will be on October 17th, exactly 2 weeks from today. And we remember that you can learn more about Dr. Daniel Crosby and all of our speakers at www.caymaninvestmentforum.com and use the discount code MONEYSENSE, one word, all caps, to receive a 10% off registration. As a final note, we wish to remind our listeners that a rebroadcast of today's show can be heard as a podcast on the CFA Society Cayman Islands webpage, as well as on all your favorite mobile podcasting platforms. And encourage anyone who has a question or topic they wish us to cover to please tweet us at MoneySense Radio and join the conversation. With that, thanks again, and please tune in 2 weeks' time.